You're listening to Genocide in Ukraine, a podcast where we uncover truths the world cannot ignore. We shine a light on Russia's latest genocide against Ukrainians, part of a long history of such atrocities and a systematic campaign of destruction that is shattering lives, threatening the international order, and challenging the conscience of humanity. Through expert insight and stories of resilience, we're delving into the human cost of this crisis and the global implications of inaction. This is more than a conflict. Ukraine is fighting for survival, justice, freedom, and for human rights everywhere. Stay with us as we seek understanding and demand accountability, because the truth and human rights matter.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How you doing, Nancy?
Good evening. I'm here a little bit discombobulated, but you beamed me up pretty well.
Oh, I'm discombobulated myself, but that's okay. Yeah, but I am looking forward to talking tonight. And Gina, I think, is going to be a little bit late. Looking forward to her coming because she has a really good handle on one subject that I think is really good to talk about. Let me do a really quick timestamp. Let us go around the world and see what time it is where. It's actually Friday, January 22nd in a lot of the world, but not all of the world. So we'll check out what time it is where. And for genocide, I try to keep it a little clean. We know I enjoy having fun with the timestamp most of the time. But it is 1:01 a.m. in London, 2:01 a.m. in Stockholm, Sweden, and 3:01 a.m. in Kiev. I had seen some warnings earlier that it might be a night where bombers come in and attack, but I haven't seen that come to fruition, which makes me happy. It is 9:01 a.m. in the workers' paradise of Perth, Western Australia, 10:02 a.m. in Tokyo, 11:32 a.m. in Adelaide, Australia. As people are half an hour off, it freaks me out. And in Melbourne, it is 2 minutes after noon, time to go for lunch. And it is 9:32 p.m. still then on January 22nd in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. Again, half an hour off. What is wrong with these people? 8:02 p.m. in, what was I going to, no, in New York. 8:02 p.m. in New York, 7:02 p.m. in St. Louis, 6:02 p.m. in Salt Lake City, 5:02 p.m. in Portland, Oregon. I'm staying away from the gum machine till later. I want to talk to Will about used gum when I start the space in a few hours. And 4:03 p.m. in Alaska, in Anchorage, Alaska, just specifically where Sarah Palin can see Russia from her house. So I see Nancy is busy stuffing the nest. And I need to ask her which phone she's doing that on, because we're having severe problems with Android phones being able to, or not being able to, more like it, put stuff into the nest. And I thought I had lost the ability yesterday for a while too, but then I just realized I hadn't requested to speak, and I couldn't post to the nest from listeners, which is the way it's supposed to be. So oh no, I was like having a fit. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't do it on my iPhone either. I can't. Oh my goodness, wait a minute, I'm not up a speaker. I can't. Duh.
So it isn't just the operating system of the phone, it's the operating system
That
of the human too.
Yeah, that was a definite user error. I was a little bit out of it. Just the way it's sort of been lately, the last few weeks, last week especially. So while we're waiting for Gina to come, I don't know if you had anything specific, Nancy. I think you saw that what we were looking at talking about, but one of the things, a couple of the things that I thought we could talk about is setup. Is actually I'm just going to blurt this one out here. One of the themes that I heard, and I haven't listened to a whole lot. I will admit that. I listened to an Alexander Medvedchuk talk with the UNICEF woman. It's called "In the Midst of Chaos," and there are some very good quotes out of that. Of course, I listened to President Zelensky today, but then I also watched a. I got to get a drink. Hang on. A presentation by Stephen Moore about Ukraine's children and being taken to Russia. And one of the people that he had on the panel was Paige, who we have had on Volya Radio before. Paige is one of the people. She's the head of basically, I believe, the Ukrainian project for the Yale Humanitarian Lab. And it was good to be able to put a face to a name and see her talking about that. And then I also caught just another clip, which I may have already closed out. Nope, there. Shared vision for a just and sustainable peace in Europe. That's actually one I should have watched, but I hadn't caught it yet. That I caught just a little bit of, and again, Alexander Medvedchuk was on that panel. One of the themes that that I kept hearing, one of the things that kept hitting me is a sense of hope. And we heard that last week with Yulia too, right? Is a sense of hope. The need to always maintain and to always have that hope. And so I was digging around and I found actually a really wonderful quote by Helen Keller. Deaf blind woman, couldn't see, couldn't hear. And she says, although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of overcoming it. And to me, that is hope, the overcoming that suffering. You have to have hope in order to overcome that suffering. And so I just thought it was very interesting in something that I've seen a lot in the Ukrainian people is that desire to maintain hope. And I don't know that that's much to go off of here, but it really has sort of hit me today that is what you see with Ukrainians right now. When you see Ukrainians who haven't had electricity, who haven't had water, who haven't had maybe even internet, who are missing all of the services that we take advantage of: electricity, heat, water, internet, and some of them for days, but they still have hope. One of the quotes that I pulled out actually from where is it? From Alexander Medvedchuk is that she was asked what is it like for the ordinary Ukrainians on the ground right now, and Alexander's answer was this: I associate this winter with cold, darkness, and gratitude, being thankful. And I think in order to be thankful, you have to be somewhat hopeful. And that's what I think that it seems to me that's what you're seeing is people helping each other, because you've got the people who are all stuck in that apartment building, all under the same circumstances, and not everybody can take care of themselves and they need help. And they're very, very grateful to be able to help, and they're grateful for the help. So, Nancy, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but that is just one of the things that hit me. And so then, it leads me to how, when looking at this genocide that we've been looking at for years at this point, how do we find hope? And I think we do, but how do we find it?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is looking at those points of light and the places where a difference is being made. And it's difficult to do at times because there are so many frustrating things that are happening. And I know that that was part of President Zelensky's speech today, was about, and basically he started off by describing it and comparing Ukraine's circumstances to the great American film Groundhog Day with Bill Murray and Andy McDowell, where you basically are repeating the same thing over and over again. And he said that that is how Ukrainians are living now. And the other thing to remember, though, is that they're living. And a key part of why they are not giving up in despair is because they know that that's what Putin wants. And they'll be damned if they give it to him. You know, he can take their people, he can kill and destroy families and homes, but he will not destroy the civilization and the citizenry that Ukraine shows to, and Ukrainians show to each other. And I think that's a key thing. One of the things that I put in the purple pill was just a quick clip from United 24 that had been shared in our back channels earlier, just to see an apartment building in Ukraine with the steam coming up as heating was being restored to that building. And again, that's, you know, the nature of the heating systems that they use in those older style buildings. But that's a sign of life, sustenance, and stubbornness. And it's a healthy stubborn. And it's what keeps their citizens, Prince, to your point, supporting each other, because everyone individually is going to have a good day where they can help others, and that same person is going to have a bad day where they just can't and they need help. But together, they're supporting each other and getting each other through those times, because we're not all strong on the same day, but we're also not all weak on the same day either. Back to you, Prince.
Absolutely. And I was actually thinking about that building you were talking about as I was saying things that I was saying. Alan, good to see you. What do you what's on your mind?
Oh, it's good to see you, Prince and Nancy. And as Nancy just said, we're not strong on every day. We're not weak on every day. We're not confused or smart on every day. But you just have to rely on those people uh, who, on the days when you're weak, they're strong. On the days when you're confused, they're clear. And I just wanted to say, Prince, you were talking about the people who asked, what do ordinary Ukrainians feel? What are they going through? I have decided there are no ordinary Ukrainians. I think all Ukrainians are just extraordinary. I don't care who they are, where they are. It seems to me, when I think of all the Ukrainians I've met in Ukraine and in the United States, I can't think of a single one who's not extraordinary in some way or another. And I think it's because of the experience that they are going through, focuses their attention in a way that so many of us are unfocused. And then you were saying, Prince, how do we find hope? Well, listen to Zelensky. Um, Listen to the ordinary Ukrainians and watch them light the fires in the snowdrifts of Kiev. But, I don't think you can find hope. I think you have to rely on others just to remind you that what else can you possibly have if you don't have hope? You're not going to get through the day. You're not going to be able to support those who need you to support them, and you're not going to be able to receive and accept the support of others without some sense of hope. So it just has to be inside you, like, I don't know, like a life force, I guess.
One of the points that Stephen Moore made repeatedly in his hour-long segment that he had, where he had it was, oh man, now I got to remember who all was there. There was
It was a great panel.
it was it
he
was
had
a great panel.
he
Go
had
ahead.
he had Paige um, from the Yale School of Public Health. Um, he had the representative of Bring Kids Home, UA, Maxime. Oh, he had Megan Mobbs, who it remind me, is she the daughter?
Yes, she is the daughter of
Yep.
Kellogg.
Okay, there you go, the daughter of General Kellogg. And he had Kaylin Robertson, who's the Irish journalist in Ukraine, who has done so much good work there. And I think that was about.
No, he had Bring Back Kids, Save Ukraine UA representatives from both of those organizations, and they were people that I really have never heard of before, which is fine. And Paige, it was good to put a face to that name, even though I just discovered who she was a few weeks ago, right? Um, and Yeah, but the Megan Mobs one really kind of surprised me. But I forget the point that I was going towards because I got distracted. Because it
Oh,
was a really good panel. Go ahead.
the point you are going towards is that everyone needs to watch this. It's about 55 minutes, 50 minutes from Davos, from the Ukraine house in Davos. And it is about the fate of the now 35,000 Ukrainian children who've been identified as abducted by Russia. Um, and you know what also goes so far as to say it wasn't just the panel members in this house. Stephen Moore led the conversation of the panel that was so enlightening.
Yeah, it
And
was. Oh,
and
sorry. Go ahead, Nancy.
Alan and Prince, I have not had a chance to watch that yet. I've got it bookmarked, and in fact, I'll post the link to that specific session, the YouTube video of it. I'll post that link up into the nest in just a minute. But did they also? I know the focus was on the 35,000 Ukrainian children who have been taken, but did they also bring out Alexandra Matvichuk's reminder of the 1.6 million children that are
Oh yeah,
under Russian occupation?
yeah. They talked about the variation and the widespread of the numbers from the 1.6 million children that are in danger in the occupied area and in Russia, right? And they are at risk. They are at risk of being sent to being indoctrinated. They are at risk of being sent to military schools. They are at risk of being recruited into the Russian army. They are at great risk, those 1.6 million Ukrainian children in the occupied area and in Russia, right? And then they talked about they actually were going off the old number of 20,000, but Page reminded that that number is that they are tracking 35,000. Very in and how they're tracking him. The example that she gave about a little girl where they had seen her in a picture, just a very innocent picture, and I want to say it was with flowers or something like that. I can't remember that detail.
Seashells. She had
Seashells,
collected
exactly,
seashells.
exactly. It was seashells that she had collected, and then I believe it was the next day they found that very same girl holding a machine gun. A picture of the very same girl holding a machine gun. And that is a perfect example of, we're sending your kid to camp and we're keeping that kid longer. And then there's that kid with that machine gun. And that's the kind of danger that 1.6 million are in. Um, but then they also talked about Maria Lvova Belova's 730,000 number. So they talked about the variation in those numbers. And realistically, Yale will say this is what we can verify. And I believe that officially Ukraine goes off of an older number with the 20,000. And and then we have these other numbers that are kids who are in danger. And yeah, so the number is very. I don't think we'll ever really truly know the exact number. I don't know that there's ever a way to know that exact number. There maybe in a peace deal a way to know that number, but I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it. But that was a point that Megan Mobbs made, was that until it's included in a peace deal, and the children need to be included in the peace deal, we'll never have a way of really knowing how many children. And yeah, but this was a really good talk. Stephen did a great job with it. I need to send him a message and tell him that. Hey, Alan, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Prince, the longer uh, the special project at the Yale School of Public Health can be funded and operating, then the better chance we have of understanding the scale of this part of the genocide Russia is inflicting on Ukraine. I was talking to Natty the other day, and we did raise in a single night, in 2 hours, we raised a significant amount of money for the special project at Yale that's tracking the Ukrainian children. And he was saying that together with that fundraising from Volya and other fundraising, largely from Ukrainian grandmothers, uh, they are now able to keep going kind of through the spring. So maybe through April. But it is really important that they do continue their work. Remember, when we first interviewed Natty here on Volya Radio, they had identified 20,000. When they presented evidence to the International Criminal Court in Hague, they had only identified 10,000 Ukrainian children. Today, it is 35,000. Now, take yourself back to the end of the Second World War and the revelation of the extermination camps that the Nazis had set up. We did not know in 1945, or even in 1946, or 47, or 48, or right up through the end of the Nuremberg trials. We did not know how many victims of the Nazi concentration camps there were. And, to your points, Prince and Nancy, we don't actually even know today. But thanks to the work of people like Daniel Goldhagen, Ben's brother, who's an extraordinary scholar in genocide history, and thanks to other historians, we come closer and closer all the time to understanding how that genocide was carried out and how many millions, one by one or 10 by 10, were killed, not only in gas chambers, but shot and killed in mass graves throughout Eastern Europe. This is why the Yale School's special project tracking these Ukrainian children must be funded and must be carried on so we can get a full understanding of this aspect of the genocide Russia is carrying out against Ukraine.
Absolutely. And Alan, thank you so much for letting us know that they've got some funding through the spring. That is just, I've wondered, and I haven't known if they're still able to go on or if they were able to gather the funding. And I'm so relieved and so thankful that they have been able to gather some funding to be able to continue and talk about people just really stepping up to help this really important um, stuff. Gina, it's good to see you. Welcome. And
Thank you.
we just started talking about some things at Davos, and one of the things that we were talking about was the panel that Stephen Moore did with about Ukrainians' abducted children. So I don't know if you have, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to see it, if you wanted to mention anything, but I do know that you have some thoughts on things that that we've heard from Davos, from the European leaders, from the leaders generally speaking, and a really good point about where that leaves us, really kind of as a world, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I talked to Steve. I interviewed him for his new short documentary, No Priests Left. And so that will be coming out. He was in Davos when I was trying to talk to him. So he was toggling between events and getting on a train. So Steve's work is just really incredible. It's always a pleasure to talk to him. But a couple of other things that occurred to me this week with Davos. I don't know if you've had a chance or if you've already discussed it, stop me. But I was very impressed with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, his special address, because it raised a lot of issues that were also kind of on the table with another article that I did this week, which is the Holy See's top diplomat, or the Vatican's top diplomat to the United Nations, who is Archbishop Gabriele Caccia, and he gave an address on January 19th at the New York headquarters of the UN, and talking about clear international legal protections from atrocities. And he talked about prevention and accountability. This was part of at the UN, every discussion is kind of like a preliminary discussion to it. These discussions have very long titles, the official titles, because they're like the first working debate of and then the 20-letter or 20-word committee name. But the point that the Archbishop and certainly that Mark Carney made is that all of the work that we're doing here and all of the work that, Nathaniel Raymond and his team at Yale, all of this work of good, caring people, and this very work of coming together in this space this week, it's all at risk if the international consensus to uphold the post-World War II order and all of the instruments and architecture that were implemented after the back-to-back atrocities of the First and Second World Wars in particular, it is all at risk if we cede that order. And these instruments are designed to work by mutual consensus and a mutual holding of accountability. And the more isolationist and the more transactional we become, collectively speaking, all of human rights are at risk. All of human lives are in danger. To take Nathaniel's work as an example, you have a permanent member of the UN Security Council engaging in what Nathaniel has called the greatest abduction of children since the Second World War. And they are doing it with impunity, despite 6 international criminal court warrants against Russian leaders, 2 of which are, one is against Vladimir Putin and the other is against his child commissioner, Maria Lvova-Belova, for the very crime of these deportations. But without consensus to hold them to account, to uphold those orders, to be part of the Rome Statute, to say, yes, this is a part of our integral defense of human rights, then what means are left? And if you haven't already mentioned Mark Carney's speech, I'd like to read a few lines from it, because I think it's very prescient, it's very telling. The transcripts are available on a number of websites, news sites, and such. Yeah. But are you guys good with that, or did you already do that?
I was waiting for you.
I'm serious.
Well,
before I get started, I see Alan's hand up, so let me just stand down for a second.
Completely waiting for you to go anywhere near that subject. So, Alan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Gina is completely right. Carney's speech and Zelensky's speech are the 2 speeches that you need to listen to from Davos. You don't really need to listen to anyone else, frankly. And the speeches go together. And I look forward to Gina highlighting Carney's speech, and then we can talk about Thucydides.
And just real quick, I'll let you know that I do have President Zelensky's speech from president.gov.ua already in the purple pill, both the transcript and also the video, and I'll grab Mark Carney's as well. I'm sure Canada has that updated on his site.
All right, Gina, you want to go ahead?
That sounds good. Can you hear me? I'm pulling it up from the CBC website, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he
Absolutely.
gave this bilingual. He began in French and he gave this on Tuesday. So again, you can find the transcript on a number of reputable sites, but he says, the power of the less powerful begins with honesty. And he prefaced this by saying he was going to talk about the rupture in the world order and the beginning of a brutal reality. This part is in French, translating into where geopolitics among the great powers is not subject to any constraints. But I also submit to you that other countries, particularly middle powers like Canada, are not powerless. They have capacity to build a new order that embodies our values, like respect for human rights, sustainable development, solidarity, sovereignty, and the territorial integrity of states. The power of the less powerful begins with honesty. And at this point, he switched into, it seems that every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they want and the weak must suffer what they must. This aphorism of cities is presented as inevitable, as the natural logic of international relations asserting itself. And faced with this logic, strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. It won't. So what are our options? And then Carney talks about the Czech dissident Václav Havel. And he says, in 1978, the Czech dissident Václav Havel, later president, wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And in it, he asked a simple question: how did the communist system sustain itself? And his answer began with a greengrocer. Every morning, his shopkeeper places a sign in his window: workers of the world, unite. He doesn't believe it. No one does. But he places the sign anyway to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along. And because every shopkeeper on every street does the same, the system persists. Not through violence alone, but through the participation of ordinary people in rituals they privately know to be false. Havel called this living within a lie. The system's power comes not from its truth, but from everyone's willingness to perform as if it were true. And its fragility comes from the same source. When even one person stops performing, when the greengrocer removes his sign, the illusion begins to crack. Friends, it is time for companies and countries to take their signs down. For decades, countries like Canada prospered under what we called the rules-based international order. We joined its institutions, we praised its principles, we benefited from its predictability. And because of that, we could pursue values-based foreign policies under its protection. We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically, and we knew that international applied with varying rigor, depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals, and we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. And he does go on, and I don't want to take up too much time because it is, a longer speech. But this is the most refreshing and sobering honesty I've seen in, widely available diplomatic discourse in years. And this is what we are seeing Europe admit, finally, is that we're starting to see that this isn't working anymore. And it's not hopeless, but it starts with honesty. And then he talks about the middle powers acting together, because he says they must act together, because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. And towards, later in his speech, he talks about what would it mean for middle powers to live the truth, going back to that analogy by Havel. And Carney says, first, it means naming reality. Stop invoking rules-based international order as though it still functions as advertised. Call it what it is, a system of intensifying great power rivalry where the most powerful pursue their interests using economic integration as a weapon of coercion. Just to stop there, remember that as Carney makes clear in his speech, and as others have as well, you don't need to fire a gun to commit genocide, right? You can do a lot of things. Economically, you can weaponize economics, you can weaponize natural disasters, you can weaponize a lot of things to implement an agenda of destruction against another people, or an array of human rights abuses, even in the course of quote unquote national self-interest. So I'll stop there because I see Alan has his hand up.
Well, I was just going to say, Gina, what makes Carney's speech so magnificent is how it addresses so many diverse audiences. I mean, the audience that I focus on, that Carney is clearly addressing, is the American audience. And he does it with that Václav Havel quote uh, about the story of the greengrocer participating in the lie. And when you listen to Trump's speech in Davos and the lie after lie after lie he told to an audience that actually knows the facts, these people in Davos know that China generates more electricity through wind power than any other nation on earth. But you have Donald Trump saying China profits from selling windmills to the world, but there's not a single wind farm in China. Nothing could be further from the truth. There's a wind farm in China that's visible from space. Everybody in Davos knows that. So when Carney is saying, don't participate in the lie, I think that he really is addressing the American audience that recognizes the lie after lie after lie that Trump is telling every single day, as well as members of his administration. And of course, Carney's speech ties into everything that Timothy Snyder has been educating Americans about so that we do not slide into fascism. And I think I will conclude simply by saying when Zelensky talked about the Groundhog Day that his country and Europe and indeed the world seems to be living through, Groundhog Day is another kind of reality based on lies. This is why Zelensky and Carney speaking in Davos connect and really we need to listen to them more than once and allow them to bring us clarity. Um, and by God, can't we just get rid of that monumental liar from Mar-a-Lago?
Yeah, and actually, I'll add really quick before we let Gina go back to talking about Carney's speech, because while you were describing that section, Gina, I had also pulled up the piece that President Zelensky said, which was, "Dear friends, we should not degrade ourselves to secondary roles, not when we have a chance to be a great power together. We should not accept that Europe is just a salad of small and middle powers seasoned with enemies of Europe. When united, we are truly invincible, and Europe can and must be a global force, not one that reacts late, but one that defines the future." And Prince Heather, that's part of the hope in both of those messages that you were describing.
Exactly. And the amount of hope that I heard as I was reading and watching things today, just it really, really hit me. And it is so important that we see the hope that Ukrainians have, and we listen to it, listen to what Ukrainians have to say, because that's what's most important. Gina, you want to continue?
Yeah, no, I think that, that is what a lot of folks keyed in on, is that Zelensky and Carney were really kind of calling the world to attention here. And again, for me, it also dovetailed with, as I said earlier, Archbishop Gabriele Caccia, who is the Holy See's permanent observer to the UN, his earlier statement. And he, was talking about, this was again it's a general debate ahead of a UN diplomatic conference on preventing and punishing crimes against humanity. I very much, although I know, and believe me, several popes have known that the UN is far from perfect. No one would say that it's not, but there are many good people working there. And, and for all of the criticism that various popes have, at different times addressed, and in particular Pope Francis, he had some, he could definitely, kind of wake the UN up a little bit. But they still believe, that this has to be the place of dialogue. And it's based on that idea that all nations have equal sovereignty, no matter how small, no matter how large, no matter what your minerals profile looks like, no matter how large your standing army is, your nuclear weapons arsenal, your lack of all of them, you still have equal sovereignty. And any abandonment of that by humanity, by the global powers, spells doom for human rights. It really does, because then it becomes the Wild West of, self-interest and might makes right. So I applaud the diplomats who, in good faith, like Archbishop Caccia, continue the really hard, laborious work of day after day trying to make this dialogue work. And in his address, which again was ahead of this upcoming diplomatic conference on preventing and punishing crimes against humanity, he said these crimes are one of the most, this is a direct quote, one of the most serious challenges confronting humanity. And he even said, while this assembly is discussing how best to address those crimes, violations of the sanctity of human life persist and in many contexts appear to be increasing. That's data that the UN already has. They've known for a long time, and their numbers tend to be more conservative than the reality in the field. Back in June, UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk said, that the picture of the global human rights landscape shows that it's in need of urgent action. And, Archbishop Caccia put the very human face on this. And he said that, the continued absence of effective collective responses is not without consequence. Children, women, and members of ethnic and religious minorities continue to suffer persecution, violence, and death in ways that profoundly wound human dignity and the moral conscience of humanity. And he said, we've got the prohibition. He said, that's well established. And he said, the central challenge before us is not the recognition of these crimes, but the development of effective measures to prevent their commission and to ensure accountability when they occur. He also, additionally, put the onus back on the states, because he said the duty to prevent and counter crimes against humanity, first and foremost, rests with nations whose jurisdictions remain the primary locus for investigation and prosecution of such atrocities. And at the same time, he stressed that the international cooperation, he called it indispensable for countering these crimes and building upon international law. But he was trying to remind, the world of this needs to be an effort where nations live up to their call in the first place, right? Because all of these instruments that they sign, to prevent and punish genocide, or the various, instruments, it has to be in some way codified. I remember scholar Christina Hook telling me, she said, look, by virtue of the fact that a nation has ratified the Genocide Convention, it means they've taken it into their own law, right? I mean, technically, Russia has signed it. Does anyone believe they've really taken it into their own law and that they're actually doing anything with it? Of course not, because they've done nothing but perpetuate genocide despite that signature, even against their own people, throughout history. So, as the Soviet Union, I think how they signed it. And that's a whole other can of worms. That why is Russia still in the in the UN, right? But this is really what we're seeing here, and we would be disingenuous, the profound and really immeasurable suffering of the Ukrainian people in this moment since 2014 and historically at the hands of Russian aggression is just that, profound and immeasurable, and it demands attention. And this is the wake-up call to the world. The larger picture here is if we don't see this as a global community and as citizens of individual nations who have responsibilities to human rights under domestic laws and international laws, where are we at? What hope do we have? And so I think the challenge is, and I invite people to think about this, how do we hold our nations accountable in this moment for upholding human rights and an international rules-based order that does take the sign out of the window and says we're not going to do, we have to, this accountability ultimately starts in the human heart, right? And it ultimately starts with each of us. Because if we cede our own autonomy and say, well, it's beyond me, there's nothing I can do, calling my elected officials doesn't work, talking to people I disagree with respectfully to get them to think differently about these things, it doesn't seem to work. I mean, if we give up, then we've just accelerated the surrender of human rights, right? So that's the moment that I'm in right now, is really trying to understand how do we, at our level, try to shift this.
Yeah, because if it all falls apart, how are we gonna, one of the things that we hear about in Ukraine all the time is, when we hear about this from, Alexander Medvedchuk, from President Zelensky, from everybody, right? They want a just peace, and part of that just peace is, there are organizations like the Tribunal for Putin. There are these things being put together, but if we can't agree and uphold that international rules-based order enough to, we're not going to be able to prosecute anybody for genocide if we don't agree on how to do it. It's just not going to happen. Go ahead, Gina.
Well, the other point that I wanted to make is that in his address at the United Nations, Archbishop Kacha talked about the transnational dimension of crimes against humanity. And that does require international cooperation. We see this right now, of course, with the theft of Ukraine's children and the unlawful deportation of its citizens by Russia. This is transnational. You have taken people out of their country, and you have transited them, in some cases through Belarus. You are taking them into your own country. There are other countries that are complicit here in this genocide, funding it, providing weapons. I mean, this has to be a transnational effort. And I find it very, very inconsistent, to say the least, that there are world leaders who are advocating for their nations first, and yet they're very quick to enter into trade partnerships or weaponize tariffs or, eye up the mineral resources of other sovereign nations. And then on the one hand, say that we need to be isolationists. On the other hand, it's very convenient to be transnational, so to speak, when it comes to slapping tariffs or, again, eyeing up mineral resources or entering into trade agreements or cozying up to certain leaders. But somehow that transnationality doesn't seem to extend to the protection of human rights. And that's problematic.
Yeah, it absolutely is. That's a big, huge problem. It has to extend to human rights, because if it doesn't extend to human rights, I see people have their human rights being ripped apart right in front of your eyes every single day these days. And that, but we can also look back and say, how many times has it worked the way it was intended to, as far as prosecuting the Genocide Convention? There's been very few times if at all, a genocide has been stopped because of people upholding their commitment to the Genocide Convention. So anyway, I feel like I'm babbling. I apologize. So Nancy, Gina, do you have more that you wanted to expand upon? Because we are getting up on the hour here. I don't know what time looks like for people tonight.
I did want to add just one thing quickly on the justice part, and it is not directly related to the genocide, unfortunately. It is to the war crimes. But Kaya Kallis, and I've put this in the replies to this space as well. Sorry, I flaked out there for a second. Kaya Kallis did post earlier today that the EU, which we know had authorized the special tribunal to prosecute Russian leaders for their role in Moscow's war against Ukraine and for the war crimes. They did provide the first 10 million euro tranche for that tribunal. So that is proceeding. And justice, of course, will be slow, but it has the long arc forward. Over to you, Gina.
Oh, I see James has his hand up. I just wanted to share, it's a little bit more, but I want to make sure James.
I can wait.
Well, I was just going to say, further into Carney's speech, he talks about, what's the end game here? And he says, let's be clear-eyed about where this leads in terms of this isolationism and every country for itself. And he says, a world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable.
I can't hear Gina.
Okay.
I lost
Yeah.
Gina.
Yeah. Hey, Gina. I don't know what's going on. Your audio's going in and out.
No, you might need to reset.
No.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, there you are.
Now I'm here?
Yeah, I can hear you well now.
No. I'm not sure how much of that I heard. Okay, James has his hand up. So does that mean you can't hear me, or?
No, I hear you, but you're going.
Oh.
Let
me
As
drop
we call
down.
it, you're going a little robotic.
Yes. Well, listen, I'll get this in here. Hope came to me slowly, but I have hope because I see the numbers every day of what's happening on the battlefield. It's a bad source of hope if you think that way, but I'm delighted to see those numbers because what has to be done in war, and it's getting done by Ukraine. I'm hopeful about the development of new systems. I'm hopeful about the rise of Europe and their growing confidence and their growing ability to provide a home for Ukraine when they're ready to get settled in. I am very hopeful about the targets that the army has, the boldness of Ukraine, the skill that they've gained in warfare. I am hopeful about the increasing success of intercepting missiles and drones, and there is so many other things. And I will just say that I'm hopeful because Ukraine is not dead yet, and that's part of their national anthem is to say that. And they look backward in history just a short time, and they see massive death. So there's not a lot of downside in being hopeful in Ukraine. I would say it's not hopium; it's real, and they have a society that is caring and good, and people feel integrated in that society. And so I hope nobody's alone. I'm sure somebody is. Somebody doesn't have enough contact, but what I see is people who believe in a system, know they're faulty, but are still working on it. So I think there's a lot of reasons for us to be hopeful for Ukraine. I somewhat despair about us in the US, but all I want to say is our best security assurance for Ukraine is to impeach Trump for the Epstein file failure to deliver that, because it is by far the most shared item in terms of consensus about what's wrong with his presidency.
Yeah, it's one of the points that Stephen made today is it's really important that we make sure that that people know Ukraine is winning. You look at the other side, 1.2 million plus people have been taken out, and they've gained 20% of the land. That is not winning, that is losing. And it's important that we always put that forth. So I wanted to say that really quick. Gina, let's see if your sound is any better.
Is this any better?
That's a lot better.
Okay, I blame Russia. I'm sorry. Blame Russian
Hey, it's
foreign influence there.
always the best place to start.
Or just a kind of cantankerous Wi-Fi connection. But I don't know where I cut off. But I wanted to just read a few more quick excerpts from Mark Carney's speech, because they kind of give a bit of a note of hope, I think, and also more of the realism that he so rightly presented at Davos. And he said, let's be clear-eyed about where this leads, meaning this isolationism. A world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable. And there is another truth. If great powers even abandon even the pretense of rules and values for the unhindered pursuit of their power and interests, the gains from transactionalism will become harder to replicate. Hegemons cannot continually monetize their relationships. Allies will diversify to hedge against uncertainty. And then further on, he talks about collective investments in resilience. And he said they're cheaper than everyone building their own fortresses. Shared standards reduce fragmentations. Complementarities are positive sum. And the question for middle powers like Canada is not whether to adapt to the new reality. We must. The question is whether we adapt by simply building higher walls, or whether we can do something more ambitious. And I think that, as he puts it in his speech, he's looking to be, as he put it, both principled and pragmatic, remaining principled in our commitment to fundamental values, sovereignty, territorial integrity, the prohibition of the use of force except when consistent with the UN Charter, and respect for human rights. And he says pragmatic, and recognizing that progress is often incremental, that interests diverge, that not every partner will share all of our values. And he said they're engaging broadly and strategically with open eyes. We actively take on the world as it is, not wait around for a world we wish to be. And, it would be wonderful if we could all be complete idealists and live up to the very beautiful language that is in these international instruments. Without hollowing them out, I think Carney sees the landscape clearly, and certainly Zelensky does. And as we advocate for human rights in this space, and as we call for accountability and prevention, we should be no less clear. And we need to take concrete steps in our own lives. And whether that's talking to people around us, simply doing the tedious work of getting on the phone on a regular basis with our elected officials, or emailing them and saying, you need to live up to this. You need to live up to this, because we cannot, by our silence, somehow give approbation to the terrible direction in which we stand to go as a species on this planet if we don't recommit ourselves to human rights.
Absolutely. Alan, please.
What I was thinking, Gina, as you were reading more from Mark Carney's speech, Carney and Zelensky are prime examples of leaders of relatively small nations. And both Canada and Ukraine are small nations, but led by brilliant people. And it is Carney's brilliance, it's Zelensky's brilliance and brilliant heroism that elevate their countries and expand their countries. While in the United States, with an idiot leading this nation, we're terribly diminished. And now, I mean, there are many other leaders throughout history that you might look to uh, who have expanded and elevated their nations because of how eloquently they spoke and how elegantly they thought. You might think of Nelson Mandela. You might even think of Margaret Thatcher, even though I know the Brits listening to us tonight don't want to think of the United Kingdom as a lesser power. Uh, it is, it has been, or listen to Golda Meir. Uh, there are so many examples of brilliant leaders who have emerged at just the time when the world needs to hear their voices. Um, you know, this is why, as Nancy has said, you can get the entirety of the importance of Davos this year just by listening to Carney and Zelensky back to back. It'll take you about 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's well worth doing as well, because what I hear resoundingly through the messages of both leaders is the focus on their own unified nations and them being part of a greater whole, working together to provide and ensure agency and freedom for their citizens. And I mean, that's what we fought the Revolutionary War for in the United States, and this is the year where, if you hear any of the historians of American history, those concepts are continuing to come up in the news on a regular basis as well too. And I just want to read a couple of parallel snips from President Zelensky's speech, where he said that Europe must be strong, and Ukraine is ready to help with anything needed to guarantee peace and prevent destruction. We are ready to help others become stronger than they are now. We are ready to be part of a Europe that truly matters, a Europe of real power, a great power. Today, we need that power to protect our own independence, but you need Ukraine's independence too, because tomorrow you may have to defend your way of life. And when Ukraine is with you, no one will wipe their feet on you, and you will always have a way to act, and act in time. This is very important. Act in time. And again, through those concepts, he is continuously reminding that we are stronger together, stronger in a unified position. That's what gives us freedom. And it was interesting because while we were having this discussion, I had another item pop up in my thread about American freedom. And Judge William Young, who was appointed to the bench 4 decades ago by Ronald Reagan, just issued his written ruling on the U.S. policy that was singling out non-citizen students for detention or deportation over their speech in the United States. And he basically is allowing the academics to seek relief from the court if their immigration status gets changed as retribution for this case. And at the end of his order, he quoted Ronald Reagan saying, "Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended in every generation, for it comes only once to a people." Go ahead, Alan.
Thanks, Nancy. I just wanted to harken back to James' really moving statements about having hope and finding hope. And one of the things that he said was he has hope because he knows Ukraine is winning. And this is something that Zelensky spoke about at Davos today. And it's very important. In order to persuade people that Ukraine is winning, all you have to do is look at the 4 years of self defense that Ukraine has succeeded in. A month from now will be the 4th anniversary of Russia's full scale invasion of Ukraine. Chuck Farrer and I talked about Ukraine winning today. This will be out on YouTube tomorrow. I apologize for promoting indications and warnings, but we have only a small audience. Uh, but the thing that we talked about was the Times of London story, that the ratio of casualties, Russian to Ukrainian, 27-1. So for every single Ukrainian soldier who's a casualty, there are 27 Russian casualties. People have doubted that. They have cast aspersions at it. But the more you know of what is happening on the zero line, and I would say from both sides, not only from the Ukrainian side, but from the Russian side, more from the Russian side is anecdotal, but the more you know what is happening, the more that ratio is believable. And 27-1 tells you one thing: Ukraine is winning, it has been winning, it will be winning, it cannot be defeated by Russia.
No, it will not be defeated by Russia. It will not. And the point that right now it is Ukraine that is protecting Europe, because if Ukraine falls, we know what will happen. And Ukraine is not falling. And that's what we need to keep in mind. Ukraine is winning. And we can see that in the numbers. We can see that in the statistics. We can see that in so many different ways. So, yeah, I wanted to, I think
Well,
we were about ready.
and
Go ahead.
yeah, we can see it in the small things too,
Yeah.
because why does Ukraine lose power? Because Russia bombs them. Why does Russia lose power in their apartment complexes? Because they can't keep their act together to keep their citizens physically safe from the cold. It's just lack of maintenance and, well, lack of people and engineers to repair those things, because they've been sent to the front to die in Ukraine for a lost cause, because Ukraine will win. Back to you, Prince Heather.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we're going to wrap up for the evening, unless anybody has something very burning to continue on with, and we can if needed. But I think it's time to give it a call it a night. So we'll go around and call it a night at this point, because that's it's about time. Try to keep it as close to an hour as we can, and we went over just a teeny bit, but we'll be okay. So Nancy, any last words?
No, I think the key last words would be, again, the three most important sessions out of Davos in its entirety, I believe, are Mark Carney's speech, President Zelensky's speech, and the Ukraine House panel on the Ukrainian children. And all three of those are linked in the replies to this space. So they're there for you in one simple, straightforward place to catch up on after we wrap up here. And I strongly encourage that, because, yeah, you'll understand why they're fighting and why they are working on ensuring that Europe and Canada and the United States, if we're willing, remain unified. Back to you.
Thanks. And Gina, final thoughts?
I would just actually end with another quote from Mark Carney. And he said in his speech, and I'm thinking, it's very easy, of course, to just be so incredibly frustrated.
The Russians are getting you again, Gina. I don't know what is up with that.
Hang on a second. Does this work any better? No?
Let's give that a shot.
Okay. It actually might be my headphones. So if this works a little better, so be it. But if you can hear me, again, I just want to quote Mark Carney. And it is frustrating to watch the world order unravel like this. But as he said in his speech, the powerful have their power, but we have something too, the capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, to build our strength at home, and to act together. And I think that's an invitation that we would all very much, people of goodwill, people who care about human rights, people who care about Ukraine, would certainly choose to accept. And the task before us is, how do we do it in our day-to-day lives, doing everything that we can and acting collectively for the defense of human dignity? Slava Isusu Christu, Slava Ukraini.
Heroin Slava.
Slava Naviki, Heroin Slava. All right. So we will see you all again next week. I'm looking at times here at 11 p.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Kyiv, 4 a.m. London will be the next space with This Week in Absurdistan with Will and I think Loki today. So we will see you guys back in about an hour and 45 minutes, I think. And with that, I am going to say good night. Scarab watching.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of Ukraine's struggle against Russia's genocide, a story of immense pain, unyielding resistance, and a demand for justice that cannot be silenced. Remember, genocide isn't just a tragedy for its victims, it's a crime against all humanity. Ignoring it endangers our collective future. Don't let the story end here. Share this episode, stay informed, and support those fighting for freedom and accountability. Together, we can bring light to the darkness and uphold the values that unite us all. This has been the Genocide in Ukraine podcast. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never stop seeking the truth.